Hello everyone. Welcome to the SPSC Sports Performance Science Corner. I'm your host today, Wayne. So today's topic is how to use respiratory analysis to scientifically create personalized exercise and nutritional plans. To start, I will introduce a little bit about our guest today. Simon is the head of technology and research at Spirofit, responsible for all science-related matters, including sports science, engineering, and product development. He holds a master's degree in electronics engineering and from the Technical University of Munich, and is currently pursuing a PhD. His master's specialization was in breathing gas analysis, and his doctoral research focuses on spirometry, respiratory gas exercise testing, which forms the scientific foundation behind Spirofit's products. Simon possesses a strong theoretical background and practical experience in the scientific field. Whether you're a fitness enthusiast, a professional coach, or simply interested in health management, this episode will bring you the latest and most practical knowledge on the application of respiratory analysis. Okay, so having said that, let's get started with the very first part of this podcast. The importance and development of respiratory analysis. So first, let's talk about what respiratory analysis and respiratory quotient are. What are they become, and why are they becoming increasingly important in modern sports science and health management?
Hey, Wayne, thanks for having me in the first place. The respiratory quotient is an important measure to get the composition of on which type of energy your body is running. So on average, you can look at your body like a motor, which has a different gas input and output depending on the stuff it's burning. So the respiratory quotient can give us information on the percentage of fat and carbohydrates you're burning. In the mathematical sense, you would be at a quotient of around 0.7, burning only fat, 100% fat, going up to 1.0, burning only carbohydrates. Anything beyond that is still possible, but that's a pure burning of carbohydrates, and then there are other bodily functions that influence that value to go even further than 1.0. The respiratory quotient overall just gives a measure on the oxygen level you input while breathing to the carbohydrates, the carbon dioxide you're exhaling while breathing.
Okay, so if I have this, because I have problem wrapping my head around this. So if I draw a graph, right? So 100% fat at 0.7, right?
Yeah.
And 100% carbohydrate at 1.
Yeah.
Right? And then the rest, I mean, you can do an interpolation, kind of draw a line in between, right?
Yeah.
But in that case, why is it possible to have less than 0.7? And why is it possible to have value more than 1? Is it because, my understanding right now is because there are other parts of the body that uses oxygen and carbon dioxide as well? That's why it can be possible?
So actually a value of lower than the 0.7 would be some medical issue. So if your body can't it transpose all of the oxygen you're inhaling into carbon dioxide, you will have an over volume of oxygen in relation to that carbon dioxide, and that would change to a level of less than 0.7. That would be actually a medical issue if you get far beyond that. And for the value beyond the 1.0, it's the point where your body is running out of this equilibrium. So you input less oxygen. You input as much oxygen as you can, but there's a limit, a fixed limit to how much oxygen you can actually transform. And if you get to that level, you will actively produce lactate, and your body has something called a carbon buffering system in your blood that puts away some of that lactate by exhaling more carbon dioxide than is in this equilibrium.
Okay. So the 0.7 to 1 is more in equilibrium, in the sustainable
Yeah,
level.
it's in the sustainable level. And
Okay.
everything beyond that, you're going into fields where, into a level where you can't sustain it anymore. Your body is breaking down, you could say. So it's getting into a lactation overall.
Okay. So usually when we do a VO2 max testing, where how we judge people whether they really give their all is that if they stop at the RER value of 1.2 around, if they don't reach 1.2, then this guy is really not trying that hard. Is that a reasonable, like 1.2 gauge?
Yeah, that could be a reasonable measure. It's depends very much on the body, because these bodily functions are varying a lot from patient to patient. So you could have someone who reaches 1.5 without the body really breaking down. So if they sustain that level, reaching beyond 1.2, then you can be sure if they are staying at that level for longer time, they're really going to give their all, because they're leading in a zone where their body is slowly breaking down, so they can't continue like that anymore. So VO2 max level testing is in general, it's focused on pushing you to your limits. So that's exactly what you want to see in the respiratory exchange rate.
Okay. So for a person that stops at 1.2 and next time he stops at 1.3 or 4, does that mean he got better at dealing with the pain of high level and high intensity exercise?
He's certainly giving more at one at a time. He's reaching his limits faster.
Yeah.
If that's really such a good thing, if it's better in his training, I don't know, but he's giving more of his all, right?
Okay. And I heard that less than 0.7 is the body is in ketosis.
Yeah, so if you're less than 0.7, you're just not only burning just fats. So ketosis would be 0.7. That's the rate.
Okay.
That's the so you say this relationship. You're turning your fats into energy, into ATP in the body, and your over the citrate cycle. And we know these formulas, these are very certain chemical formulas. So the output is a certain level of a certain input of oxygen and a certain output of carbon dioxide. So we know it's exactly this relation of 0.7.
Okay, I see.
So if you get really close to 0.7, I'd still say you're in ketosis. So 0.71 is still very close to only fats burned from your body.
I see. And I heard that hyperventilation is more than 1. Is that true?
Yeah, so what happens in hyperventilation is you're not giving your body enough time to get all the oxygen he would transfer. So you're quickening that process. So even if you fake hyperventilate, you're getting your body in a state where he produces a lot of lactate, and you have to so afterwards it will go down faster if you fake hyperventilate. If you're not getting into your max exercise level, just hyperventilating on your own, you're faster back to a normal respiratory exchange ratio. but it still goes up because the carbon buffering still sets in.
Okay, so you kind of tricked your body thinking it's going that way. The result is the same.
Yeah.
I see. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much. Let's move on to the next topic: health fundamentals and respiratory analysis. Besides athletes, can the general public also benefit from respiratory analysis?
I think it helps a lot because respiratory analysis, depending on its use, can not just give information on your general fitness, but it can give information on your blood system, on your breathing organ, and on your bodily composition overall. What we have a lot coming with our system is metabolic rest testing, where you're trying to get the respiratory exchange ratio at rest with no food beforehand. And all this testing can give a lot of info on how stressed you are, on how flexible your body functions with its macro use. And so we can generate some better informed information on how the dietary needs of the body vary from person to person based on these measurements.
I see. And so how do we link, respiratory analysis to the dietary needs for the person? Let's say if a person is the metabolic, the RER is high, then what should he eat?
So if the RER is high, he should eat more fats and less carbohydrates. That's first, because your body is burning a lot of carbohydrates, so you want to reduce that level. So the RER is really synchronous with your metabolic flexibility. So you could actually say the lower it gets, the better, based on that at some point you will always go into burning carbohydrates at some exercise level. So that's often misunderstood, but even when you're if you're running, you're not really burning your fat levels, but you would burn fat at just walking pace, just going on a stroll instead of running, because your RER is going up pretty quickly. And this going up, so if you're an RER beyond 0.85 at rest, you should and you want to change something about your diet, you would know that your level of carbohydrate input, so that's at that point keto intensive diet would be more informative and more useful for that person. Instead, when you're already running on a lot of fats and you're talking about, I feel, so you have an RER of around under 0.79, you would go to increase your carbohydrate intake just to get that level of energy out of it.
Oh, so you do want some more carbohydrate if your RER is low.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought lower is better. Why do we want it higher?
So it's better like your heart rate. So if you have a low heart rate, it shows your fitness, but it depends. So you would only want to increase your RER if you have a lot of sports to do, if you need that explosive energy. That's harder for you to get if your RER is low. So we see a low RER more in athletes that go running or do biking. So they have these long times of exercising instead of that explosive energy. And depending on what kind of energy use you want to have in your everyday life, you could you can adapt your dietary needs based on the RER.
Okay, I see. So let me summarize it and see if I understand it correctly. If the resting RER is high, then you want to reduce the carbohydrate so that the rest RER can be lower, ideally less than 0.79, like at the 0.7 range. Yeah. Once you get to the 0.7 range, to improve sports performance, then you now have some room to increase your carbohydrate intake. And so increasing carbohydrate intake the goal is not to increase the RER, the resting RER value. It's more so that you can sustain the exercise longer. So it's more about sports performance and later on.
Exactly.
Okay.
What we talked about now was a lot of macros, but the RER together with the VO2 value at rest can get even more interesting because we know the percentages of the macros, we can calculate or more like measure, because most of the calculations are averages. We can measure the actual calories you're burning at rest.
Yeah,
because we know what gas you're intaking and what gas you're outtaking. So like a motor, if you know what's coming in and what's going in and what's coming out, you know exactly what was burned, the amount and the percentage. So we have in a future update of our system, we have that comparison to a general calculation based on your gender, weight, and age, compared to what you as an individual are actually burning, measured with the gases.
Okay, interesting. And so for RER, we basically compare carbohydrate and fat, right? So in terms of nutritional plan, for macros, protein is also very important. So can the amount of protein intake also be in a way determined or recommended from breath analysis, or the protein intake is more so can be determined or recommended from other factors than breath analysis?
With protein, it's a bit more difficult to get the correct values because you're burning some level of protein, right?
Yeah.
That is significantly lower than carbohydrates and fats. And the value when you burn protein lays exactly between those two at 0.85. So
oh, really? Interesting.
It would average them out. But because it's such a small percentage, it doesn't really influence the measurement. So if you really want to measure how much protein you're burning, you would need some more analysis of your bodily fluids. So you could test the urine for the dissolved protein stuff, and that would give you a certain number. What we do now is doing exactly that, adding, we know that caloric consumption, and we are adding that dependent on what you want. We can add to our more accurate measurement that calculation on average what percentage of protein you would burn at a certain gender, a weight, and age.
So is the percentage like insignificant, or is it kind of like 5%, or is it more like 0.1% or 1% that you can ignore it?
It's more around 5%, so you can just ignore it. But protein burn rate isn't that important because your protein intake is on multiple multiples higher. So if you want to gain muscles, for example, for the percentage that you're burning, it's really around I think 5%. Is not really relevant in the overall picture. If you think about typical muscle gain diets, you'd have up to 60% protein and sparing
okay.
the other 30%, other 40% into 20 margins for fats and carbohydrates in your overall energy needs.
I see. Okay, so let me summarize this to see if I understand it correctly. So our body also burns protein, and for breath analysis on its own, without bodily fluid analysis, we applied a constant factor to it to take that into consideration, because it's not small enough to ignore it, but at the same time, it's not that big or important to actually make that an important factor. And in terms of how we get that number into the nutritional plan, first of all, we don't really need to worry about that we don't have enough protein, because usually we eat more than what we burn, because we burn a very small amount compared to what we usually intake. And in terms of whether we want to take this much or much more, then I suppose that will come from our fitness goals, or how much muscle we want to build, and also what other activity. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's exactly it.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much. Now I also learned a lot more. So breath analysis and nutritional plan. So far we talked about macros, right? But what about the type of food? Is that something that's more so based on personal preference? For example, in terms of carb, there are different types of carbohydrates, right? Is that something that it can help determine, or it's more so just more about the percentage of the macro, and then each coach or a nutritionist can customize it for the individual?
So in general, it's not that important. For the measurement it is. So you have the food you eat directly influences your rest RER and the flexibility you have there. So you should, for example, before you're doing a rest measurement, you shouldn't eat small chain carbohydrates, because your body will in a short time burn them, and that will increase the RER from your normal burning rate. So dependent on that, the measurements can differentiate, but as we know, long chain carbohydrates take longer to digest, and they would be taken longer to measure.
Okay.
But in the dietary needs overall, I think they're not really related to what we measure in breath analysis.
I see. Okay, so we tell people to fast 6 hours, then it's okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, thank you very much for the important details, and let me go to the next section: static respiratory analysis. What is resting metabolic rate? How is it related to respiratory exchange ratio, and what does a high or lower RER mean during resting measurements? I think we kind of talked about this already, right? From our discussion earlier.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. The RER is just the value overall. It's independent on if you're running or if you're doing a rest measurement. And what we can do with that RER, we can take it over a longer percentage of time and average it out, and then we can get that information on how does your body actually work at rest, and get these dietary information out of that.
Okay, and since we already talked about RER, I'm also interested to know, in the static respiratory analysis, what are some other measurements that are interesting for you besides RER?
So we're actually not only checking for lungs, but lung capacity, but we're also doing a heart rate. Rest heart rate is an interesting factor. Where right now we're working at heart rate variance as well, because that's important to measure stress in combination with the RER. So you can get some kind of limit on stress if the person is hyperventilating. That would increase that as well. So we can combine these two values to filter stress out of the equation if we're looking at metabolic flexibility. And lung capacity is also an important factor. So the volume you can input at rest per breath, exactly how much of volume of air you can input, that can inform on your general fitness and where you can go with your body as well. And together with the heart rate, we also have the breath rate. So these two relate together. So the lower your breath rate, the fitter you are. Some even train for a very, very low breath rate. It's kind of like meditation they're doing. But there's not that many dietary information you can get out of that. It's more on how fit in general your body is.
Okay, so now I have a question. What was better, higher frequency, less volume, or lower frequency, high volume for a person at rest?
For person at rest, it would be a lower frequency and a higher volume, of course, because you want a person to relax. I mean, the volume isn't that important of a factor, because we do measure it, but it cannot really change, because your lung has a certain volumetric capacity. You won't be able to increase the volume of your lungs without some kind of transformation. I don't know, a growth spurt or something like that. So that's
actually determined. So an athlete cannot train to change it. A more fit person cannot have a bigger capacity.
No. So it dependent on how much of your actually capacity. So it is limited, but you can increase how much of your actual bodily capacity you use.
The utilization of your limit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of how much of the air you're actually moving in and out of your lung is limited at a certain point, but the percentage you're using can increase.
Okay, so you can train that, yeah?
Yeah.
By breath training. Okay.
By breath training, but still a lower frequency will help with increasing the value even at rest.
Okay, so if I want to link the different metrics together, a higher stress will equal lower heart rate variability and also higher breathing frequency, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, and does a higher RER require more overall air, or a lower RER require more overall air?
The RER is independent of the air you're using, because you're using the percentage of the volumes against each other. But still, if you have a lower volume, in most cases, you're breathing more frequently, you're going more into a hyperventilation, and that will in turn increase the RER.
Okay, I see. Thank you very much for the information. Now let's move on to the dynamic respiratory analysis, which I think will have much more to talk about. So we all know that VO2 max represents aerobic capacity. Are there other important indicators, and how do they relate to RER, and what does the high or low RER mean during dynamic measurements?
So there are a load of different other important factors for a dynamic lung test, but most of all, they are calculated from measuring the flow, and thus the volume you're breathing, and the percentages of oxygen and carbon dioxide together with the heart rate. An important level on general fitness is your oxygen volume per heartbeat.
Okay.
Because that's actually what part of oxygen gets to your cell, because you breathe in and the heart beats faster than you're breathing, so you're getting parts of oxygen segmented to your system, and so that is an important factor as well. Together with the VO2 max, you also have a VCO2 max. So that is in direct relation with the RER limit. So the higher the VCO2 max is compared to the VO2 max, the higher the limit is. So we talked before, we talked about an RER of 1.2 or of 1.5, and the higher this VCO2 max is, the higher it shoots up. And that is how well your carbon buffer system in your cells work. So how much lactate is actually released from your blood via CO2 at a certain level.
Can you train it?
There is something you can train, but it's pretty hard, because then you go into getting into oxygen deprived environments and try train that, getting closer to the carbon buffer system. But a lot of it is genetics. So in most runners, you see a better carbon buffer system. They just are able to get a lot of lactate out, a lot more lactate out than a normal person. So there is some part of training to it, but the study situation is still pretty bleak in that topic.
Yeah, because we come across divers that are interested in free divers, they're interested in the breath analysis. And from talking about this, I'm thinking maybe what they do, or maybe they would really benefit from a high VCO2 max, because the higher it is means their body can be underwater longer, right?
Not really. So they would get a lot more out on lung volume. So how much, if they train the percentage of lung they can use, and then it's actually the VO2 max that's more important, because the buffering system only sets in when they're breathing, when they're exhaling again.
Oh, okay.
So so they would be quicker to normalize after free diving if they have a big VCO2 max. They would get faster in getting back down to a normal RER rate. So if they're doing multiple dives per day, that would be an interesting part. But for a one dive, the VO2 max is really significantly higher in interest.
Okay. So during the dive, a high VO2 max and lung capacity would help, but the high VCO2 max then it will help with recovery into the next dive.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
And the other important information you can get out on a breath test is recovery. So after you measure VO2 max, it's interesting on how fast and how low most of the values go after a certain time frame, roughly around 5 minutes, is what we do in our measurements. So how quick is the body to recuperate, to get back to a steady state without breathing too much? So in this case, then VCO2 is also interesting, as well as the heart rate and the breath rate. So what we can measure as a value of how quickly the body is back to normal is the difference of the heart rate before the VO2 max measurement and after.
Okay.
And for breath rate, it's the same. So the lower this difference gets, the better your rehabilitative ability is.
Okay. So what is there a protocol? Because right now we look at, okay, so how fast it is, but is there a protocol saying that within a specific amount of time, how much percentage is returned to normal? Or how much is returned to normal within a specific amount of time, right? You got to fix a factor, and then you look at the recovery rate. Do you have a standard protocol for this part of the analysis?
We're working on that. So right now, I'm exactly working on that part.
Oh,
I'm
nice.
showing that, but we want to have a very scientific basis. So I'm reading up on a lot of papers on what kind of thresholds they determine to get these values. Because for most novice users, it's more interesting to see a number than looking at a graph, right?
I see. And another interesting point for the VO2 max testing is that suppose that you can't sustain output at this intensity anymore, but you can still go further. Then does it make sense to go further, continue? For example, okay, let's say I'm running on a treadmill. I'm running at 20 kilometers per hour at 10% incline. And so I'm already at my max, and I feel like I can't do that anymore. I want to stop. But then if I drop 1% incline, I can go for another, for example, 2 minutes. Then is there a point, or should I just give up?
You should just give up at that point, because when you reached your max, your body is in destruction mode. So even if you drop back down to a lower level at a certain time point, you will just shut off. So your body will have too much of lactate in the muscle cells that can't be buffered off, because the body actually needs rest to recuperate into that rehabilitation. It could still go, but it's really the time frame you can still go, even if you go the level down. It doesn't really change. You could even stay at that level. You wouldn't. So these 2 minutes, have you tried it out? Did you do that? Because
No,
I think actually, if you could go 2 minutes after your VO2 max at a lower level, you can actually go these 2 minutes at the same level as well.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Maybe I'll try it myself too. I have this question because, okay, usually I reach my max heart rate not from going uphill. I usually reach my max heart rate from running downhill, but long distance, really hard. And so I'm thinking uphill is harder, right? So maybe the limitation is maybe my muscle endurance or whatever. So I feel tired already and I can't go anymore. If I'm going downhill, I reach a higher heart rate. So if I compare this to VO2 max, then maybe I cannot go anymore, but my body can still use more VO2 max. That's where I had this question.
But then I would, you should do slower and not that steep of an incline in wattage level. So you would, if you have that issue that your muscles can't go with that level, you could reach the same VO2 max just by increasing the time frame of increasing the load.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah, because
and then you would reduce the load on your muscles, and it would be. But if for the lung, it's the same load.
Oh, okay. I see. So because we're not testing muscle strength, so we actually want to reduce muscle endurance muscle load, so that we can increase aerobic load, because we want to actually test for VO2 max.
Yeah, we want to get the lung max and not your muscular max.
So in that case, you probably wouldn't recommend running on incline. We just increase speed will be a better way to test on runners. Is that correct?
It depends. So it's best to measure in the discipline, because even if you can increase the VO2 max by doing a different test, the athlete will not be able to use that increased VO2 max you did by changing the measurement, because they're in their discipline. So
looks better. It had a higher number.
Yeah, it looks better, but what we should actually do overall with having these mobile systems and having this more flexible application is determining, coupling this VO2 max with the sports, with the discipline.
Yeah.
Because that's, I mean, it looks better, but if you're, I don't know, if you're a bodybuilder, what does it help if you can do a VO2 max of 70 by running? No, if you're a biker, what does it help if you can do a higher VO2 max by running?
Yeah.
Maybe you should switch discipline. Maybe that's it, but.
Okay, I see. So basically, the advantage of having the Spirofit system is that it's very light. It can be done outdoors, and you can actually take it to do your own discipline, and then actually get value from it. But then, would you say that only endurance sports would benefit from a high VO2 max?
It really depends. So we had some talks with football coaches. So I wouldn't say that's your state-of-the-art endurance sport. And it depends on what's more important if on the position you're working on. So if the athlete is constantly running back and forth the field, VO2 max can be more important, but his rest rate is also important. How fast can we recuperate to a certain level? And depending on that, I think we are really, really early on getting this measurement to these other disciplines and just figuring out what we can do. Because theoretically, even a bodybuilder could get his perfect rest period between sets by measuring his RER.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because
I mean, who would actually? I mean, the use case is pretty niche because you just wait 2 minutes between sets and then rest should set in. But if you really want to get that little bit more out of your routine, you could actually measure on how long you need to rest.
Okay. Yeah, because we're working with muscle oxygen sensors, right? And then so with the muscle oxygen sensor, you can actually see when the oxygen is actually re-oxygenate the muscle, and then you know when exactly you should start your next set. But I never thought about that without breath analysis. So would you look at RER to determine your next set, or which metric would you actually be looking at for this application?
I think mostly breath rate and RER, because for sprinters as well, if you have this high impact burst of energy, you're always going straight to only carbohydrates, straight to getting close to a very high level, and your breathing doesn't really change. So VO2 max wouldn't be an interesting factor at that case, because you just can't keep up with that stark increase. So the RER would be the most interesting value.
Cool. So next time we can do maybe 100-meter sprint interval training with Spirofit, and then I can share the data with you afterwards. I'll be interested in doing that.
That would be interesting.
Yeah. Another thing that we look at is energy from fat and energy from carbohydrate, the crossing point. And that was from the Pinoy, education system that we learned that. And is that something that you also look at as well, the crossing line?
We're mostly looking at fat max. Fat max, not really the crossing point, because the crossing point is really dependent on which units you present these two values.
unit.
Do you do gram per hour or do you do calories? And dependent on that, the relationship of these two change. So correlating these two isn't that it doesn't really make that much sense, because you can get a lot more grams of carbohydrates.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe ounce, right? So it depends on, you have different crossing points.
Yeah,
so
you have different crossing points and
sense.
how so that really doesn't make that much sense. Fat max is an interesting point, because for weight loss, people want to get to the level, where do I burn the most fat?
Okay, I see.
And if you do a VO2 max test and get that fat max point, you can actually say, okay, that's where your pulse and all the other data. You don't need to do every training with the Spirofit system. You can relate. Maybe you have a compatible wearable where you do measure the pulse as well. And then you just get out the time point. Okay, what was my pulse at my fat max? And I can just measure that relation to my certain variable to apply that to my training.
Okay, that's interesting. But I think that tells, well, I mean, of course, the crossing point isn't really like what we talked about, not that accurate. But with the crossing point, what we used to think that it told us whether this person's energy system is good or not so good. If basically, when does the person start utilizing more carbohydrate? Then if the person utilizes more carbohydrate than fat, starting at zone 1 of the heart rate, then that's not so good, right? But if it kicks in so late, maybe that's also not so good. We want to see that crossing point at maybe zone 2 or zone 3.
Oh, so we do these crossing points as well, but we're not using fats and carbohydrates. We're using the values that are behind that, and that are the oxygen volume and the carbon dioxide volume as well. And then these crossing points are interesting, because then you have this relationship on when do they cross, and even when you look at it, there's a point when your CO2 starts increasing more than the oxygen. And that is the point when you start burning carbohydrates.
Okay, so it's CO2 exhale, right? But oxygen intake.
Yeah.
Okay. But we're comparing exhale and intake. Oh, but then, okay, I see. The oxygen we actually use. Okay, not really.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. And so what would be? Yeah.
It's actually the same, because the way we get to fat and carbohydrates is exactly this relationship of oxygen and together with the VO2, but still it's exactly that. So we're using the underlying
more data, right? Without
with the underlying data.
Okay, I see.
Do a similar comparison.
Yeah, and then so the best scenario is it the crossover at zone 2 or zone 3?
So the best scenario is that this crossover is in zone 2. There's another crossover when the volume levels cross and where the RER hits the 1, because that's very close to your second ventilatory threshold. You can even closer determine it by looking at other graphs. We have the medical 9-field graph in our analysis, where you can actually select the best fitting frame where this second ventilatory threshold is. But and that's exactly what you're trying to figure out, is where are these thresholds. And I think that's what you're talking about. This cross point of fats and carbohydrates at the PNOE is actually the first ventilatory threshold, where you're beginning to get into this aerobic anaerobic zone, where you're starting to mix your fuels.
Okay, I see. Interesting. Okay, so the next question is the Spirofit respiratory analysis applications. what kinds of analysis can the Spirofit respiratory analyzer perform, and what makes it unique?
So we do perform a standard spiroergonomic test, so just ramps or inclines. We have this rest metabolic test, and what's special with us is we have this training test as well. What you can do, the training test. So what you can do is you do a VO2 max test first.
Okay.
And then you measure your training. And by
Same
selecting...
Session? Same session, like you do VO2 max?
No, 2 different sessions.
Oh, okay.
And you select your previous VO2 max test, and you compare your data from your training to that VO2 max test to actually recognize, in which zones have I trained? So what level of my VO2 did I actually accomplish?
Okay, I see. So basically, you kind of map out what you can do in a wide spectrum, and then you can monitor every training and to see which category, which level it fits in.
Yeah. And in general application, we don't have calibration time before measurements. We do recommend that you wait a certain time while wearing the system, just to get an equilibrium in our measurements system concerning temperature and humidity. But in general, we do not need to calibrate because we do a 2-point calibration at each breath. That is possible because we have a different CO2 sensor than most competitors. It's an in-house CO2 sensor that's based on heat transition, I think it's the correct word. So it's a lot quicker. We have a measurement rate on the system, on the device, of 50 hertz. And we calculate and already filter this data to send out to the app a breath-by-breath analysis. And that what makes the system very comfortable to use, because you don't need to calibrate with a calibration gas or anything. We are actually limited at very small spaces because we do this constant breath-by-breath calibration, that when the air quality in a small space is getting worse, we do see that worse air quality on our measurements.
Air quality, like pollution?
Like CO2 level and oxygen level in your room. So better have a very... Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Pollution as well. I mean, most of the pollution is carbon-based.
Yeah.
But that's only in rooms, so we don't have any issues outside independent of pollution. It's just if there's too much CO2 is in a room, it will influence the measurement at some point.
Okay, I see. But is there like a warning sign on the app or anything that tells us, look, that your data is not accurate, you need to do something about this?
Yeah, at a certain threshold of the percentage level you get out, the app will inform you that you've reached that no more accurate level.
Okay, so if one day I do it outside and it says not accurate, it means that pollution is really bad that day.
Yeah, you have a really high CO2 level. But that's these CO2 levels on pollution we talk about are insignificant. So it really just happens inside of rooms when you have really heightened CO2 levels.
Yeah, because I asked because sometimes we get warning from the weather station.
Yeah, I know what
we
you
have
mean.
High smog, and then
these levels are ppm and not percentages, so they're of no significance.
Oh, okay, I see. I hear what you're saying. Okay, so the next question is, what are some of the precautions that we need to take during rest and exercise testing?
So in rest testing, it's important, as you said, to wait some time before doing to eat something for 6 hours, to not influence the measurements directly by the food you took further, because you want to measure your system overall. What's important there as well is to not see the values as a one-fits-all, because it's very dependent on diet. So some studies show that in Asian communities, the respiratory exchange ratio is significantly different from Europeans one because of their diet. So because in Europe we eat mostly short carbohydrates like bread and stuff like that, while rice, for example, has a really long carbon need, and it might be genetic as well. We don't know that much about it yet, but
that's interesting.
It's really important to know to which kind of group you're comparing your values. It's not a one-size-fits-all.
I see. So the type of carbohydrate that your body is used to digesting could also have an impact on your RER.
Yeah.
But this difference will be less seen in athletes, right? Because for them, it should be 0.7.
Yeah. It might be as well their dietary needs, because your gut bacteria will change on what you eat, and thus your actual energy consumption changes, and the percentages as well.
So basically compare to yourself, not really to other people.
Yeah, compared to yourself. Try to better yourself and not try to reach a certain goal. Most of your metabolic values are improvable, but just in your bodily composition. Some things you can change, like your overall lung volume, height, and stuff like that.
Okay, I see. Very nice. Okay, and now
let's just say a few words to the more interesting part, to the dynamic testing. You should really focus on getting a steady increase of your wattage if you do a VO2 max test.
Okay, steady increase.
And do not start at a too high wattage or speed, because this increase can lead to hyperventilation early on if you start too sudden. If you're not
I see. So basically, if you start too high, then it could lead to hyperventilation and may lead to muscle fatigue, failure.
And then your VO2 max is off by margins because you're too low.
Oh, okay. I see. But we also worry that if we go for too long, right? For example, if we just go like increase very little each time, then the test takes too long and it becomes an endurance test instead of like a max test. So is there a guideline of, for example, we should aim to reach max, we should pace it so we reach max in 15 minutes or so?
Yeah, 15 to 20 minutes is a rough threshold you should reach. You should set for your time frame for these measurements. You might adapt that if somebody doesn't work with that limit, that's fine as well. And a warm-up before doing the measurement is helpful as well.
Before, do you also want to measure the warm-up run, like already wearing the mask?
I wouldn't, because then the people see data and they want to try out and they overexert themselves. Just let them do their basic warm-up. It doesn't need to be a warm-up run. It can be just doing some
stretching and everything.
Some stretching, just getting your body ready that it knows it's time for exercise.
Okay, I see. Thank you so much. And the last question is the limitations for static and also dynamic testing.
So we have time frame limitations for static testing. So you need to have a certain time periods to measure, so that you can filter out outliers via statistics. So a rough estimate would be between 10 and 20 minutes, even for a rest test, just to get a really certain average on your values.
Okay. And when you see outliers, do you take them out?
Yeah, they are filtered. So we have moving average filter, and we have median filter as well. So most of the outliers are falsely detected breaths. If you have like a very small breath that doesn't contain any gases, you can be certain it's an outlier and it doesn't influence the measurement overall.
Okay. And does the app do this already, or we do it manually?
No, the app, so the server does that already. The app does show all of the breaths you're using. We want to be very transparent. The live data is showing you what you want to see, but the server will make the data more readable and more useful.
Okay, so when we see live, the data is raw, but once we upload to the server and we see it on the cloud about the report, the report, then it's already filtered.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And what about the dynamic testing limitations?
So for dynamic testing limitations, we have some limitations concerning temperature. So we did go to 0 degrees and did measurements that looked all right. We just don't have the capacity to do really studies on how low we can go. But at a certain point, the gas in the chamber is so much different than from what you're exhaling and inhaling that it's starting to offset the measurement.
Okay, I see. That's probably not something we need to worry about in Taiwan.
No, I don't think so. Unless you want to go into the mountains and do some testing and it's really cold. But what's more important is that this dynamic testing is not one thing and it's always the same value. So your VO2 max can change for up to 4%. It's not just our system, it's just in general, VO2 max can change up to 4% in both directions, from measurement to measurement, even if they're just 1 week apart. It's just
like body weight, right? Your body is different.
Yeah, your body is different, and it's just you exerted yourself a little different, and that can make this change. So it's important to, if you have this importance in these VO2 max values, to take them regularly and not look at a one-off number, but look into the general tendency of that value.
Okay. Sounds good. And in terms of temperature, is there a max temperature that the system is accurate until? Or max humidity?
We haven't reached that max temperature. Humidity, the system will block you from using it if you're exceeding a humidity of 90%. Okay. Then you won't be able to. Relative.
Okay. Yeah, absolute is to max, I think 20, 30-ish.
Yeah. No, it's relative, and it's like that because that's what we determined is where we can say the values aren't accurate anymore, and we don't want you to do those measurements. Just please stop.
Okay, so as long as my app doesn't tell me it's bad, then we're okay in Taiwan.
Yeah,
that's the takeaway message.
Important for the device after using it is that because you have a exhaling humidity of 100%, it increases a lot. So we have a system where the pump will keep going after you completed your measurement until the humidity reaches a certain threshold where we say it's safe to shut off the device. There won't be any water inside the measuring chamber. That's what we do to keep out excessive humidity.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the tip. Cool. And I think that concludes our podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and thank you so much for taking your time to join us. And I look forward to meeting you again in the future, hopefully in person too in Germany.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm happy to meet you here in Munich.
Cool. All right. Well, then in that case, hope you have a good day and see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.